Hello and good afternoon from Jakarta. Welcome to today's FPCI Group's virtual public forum and global town hall series on In Search for a Viable Political Solution, Can the Long-Lost Two-State Solution Be Revived? I am Lisa and I will be the master of ceremony for today's event. This public forum is brought to you by Foreign Policy, Community of Indonesia and National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, Japan. And it is the third forum of this year's FPCI GRIPS Virtual Public Forum series. This forum is also a part of our newly growing Global Town Hall series. Today, I'm pleased to welcome over 200 participants from across Indonesia, Japan, and more countries tuning into our channels. Ladies and gentlemen, the October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel and the subsequent retaliation by Israel Defense Forces in Gaza has awakened the attention of the international community on the Israel-Palestine conflict. This latest episode has claimed the lives of innocent civilians on both sides, in which Palestinian civilians bear the brunt with over 12,000 Gazans killed, mostly the elderly, women, and children. The region and the world cannot afford to see endless military confrontation in the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is sure to cause more loss of lives. A peaceful political solution is the only cure to this conflict. Today's discussion will dive deep into the only viable solution to the conflict, which is the two-state solution, and will invite perspectives from the north, south, east, west, allowing for a diverse exchange of minds. To begin, let us invite Ambassador Yutaka Imura, Senior Fellow at GRIPS, to deliver his keynote speech.
Do you hear me? Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Lisa and Dino. Thank you indeed for me to be able to share my personal thought on the crisis, current crisis in the Middle East. Today, we need to discuss one of the most tragic international crisis developments that we are currently witnessing. Since October 7, as Lisa mentioned, not a single day has passed without news of the brutality of the war between Hamas and Israel and the humanitarian disaster resulting from this war. It is deeply saddening that the international community has not been able to come up with any joint action to stop this war. We were initially appalled by the brutality of Hamas's attacks on innocent Israeli civilians, including taking hostages. In the following weeks, we were constantly shocked by the military actions of Israel Defense Force involving Gaza's civilians, particularly women and children, as well as hospitals and schools, among other facilities and infrastructures. Both sides should be condemned for the brutality of their actions. As the war goes on, involving civilian casualties, we hear more voices, not only in neighboring Arab countries, but also around the world, protesting against Israel's apparent reluctance to consider humanitarian factors in its military actions. Why is this happening? What should be done to stop this brutality? Can we work together to find a political solution to the conflict? Specifically, can we revive the two-state solution, meaning establishment of Israeli and Palestinian state coexisting peacefully? This is the main theme of today's discussion. Indeed, the two-state solution was once considered the only way to solve the Israel-Palestinian conflict following the Oslo Accord, signed 1993. It was the first time we saw a glimmer of hope for a political solution to a problem that originated with British and French colonialism. during the First World War, and the UN partition for Palestine in 1947, followed by 4 Middle East wars. International effort led by the United States to find the appropriate formula based on the Oslo Accord, satisfying both sides, continued until the Obama administration. I myself, as Japan's special envoy for the Middle East peace, tried to contribute to the last effort led by United States Secretary of State John Kerry. During this period, Martin Natalegawa, then Foreign Minister of Indonesia, and myself worked together to establish CPAT, which is abbreviation of Conference on Cooperation among East Asian countries for Palestinian development, enabling East Asian countries that had achieved significant economic development to help the Palestinians prepare economically for the day when they establish an independent state. However, the dream of the two-state solution gradually faded and was finally extinguished by the Netanyahu administration and Hamas, both of which considered the two-state solution incompatible with their respective ultimate political objectives. Netanyahu did not want to stop settlements in the West Bank, and Hamas continued to envision the destruction of Israel as its objective. Even before the start of the war between Israel and Hamas, a majority of the Palestinians and Israeli Jews were not supporting the two-state solution. Those Palestinians supporting the two-state solution had dropped to 33%, and as for the Israeli Jews, to 34%, according to the joint poll conducted by Tel Aviv University and the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research in Ramallah, with the Netherlands and Japan funding the project. Now I'd like to touch upon several points that seem most important for the international community to move ahead in attaining peace and security in the Middle East. First, a ceasefire and the release of hostages are absolutely necessary, indispensable. As it involves the security of Israel, it may not be easy for its people to accept a ceasefire, particularly at this stage immediately after Hamas' surprise brutal attack on October 7. The first step could be humanitarian pauses. After 4 failed attempts on November 15, UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for the immediate release of all hostages and for urgent and extended pauses in Gaza, with 12 countries in favor, including Japan, to none against 3 abstentions. Hopefully, the resolution will be quickly executed and should be rapidly expanded to become a complete ceasefire. It has been just announced just some hours ago that Israel and Hamas agreed to 4 days of pause in fighting and release of 50 hostages by Hamas, held by Hamas, and 150 Palestinian women and children held in Israeli prison. This is good news, but although it is a good news and big step forward, if the situation on the ground remains as it is now, we may soon witness a worldwide backlash against Israel's war effort, however it may seem unfair for the Israeli. As it is becoming increasingly unbearable for people around the world, including nearly 2 billion Muslims, to see thousands of Palestinians killed or expelled from their homes by the IDF actions. Second, for the peace of entire world, it is essential to prevent Israel-Gaza conflict from escalating into regional war. If this happens, along with the war in Ukraine and US-China tensions, the world may spiral into worldwide turmoil, if not a third world war. We are already witnessing some armed clashes along the Lebanon-Israel border and in the West Bank. We must also carefully monitor whether those with links to Iran in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq may become involved in the war against Israel. Third, a comprehensive post-war strategy should be addressed at the earliest possible stage. Without a political and security framework that would enable Palestinians and Israeli Jews to live together, peace will never come. We should question not only who will be in charge of security in Gaza and of its administration, including schools and health, but also what kind of status should be given to Gaza and what role the Palestinian Authority will play once the war ends. In the international community, particularly moderate Arab countries, should also be involved if a political solution is envisaged. These issues should be discussed within the context of an overall institutional framework to be created covering Israeli and Palestinians. This brings us to the importance of the theme of today's discussion. Can the two-state solution be revived? If asked for my personal opinion, my answer would be yes. It should be revived because there is no other path to a political solution than the creation of the two states. It will be extremely difficult and time-consuming to do it after the numerous failures of peace effort and with two people full of mutual distrust and hatred accumulated during the years of bloodshed, particularly that of the current war between Hamas and Israel. However, I believe that without political solution leading to the establishment of the two states, Israeli and Palestinian states, we will never achieve the peace in the region. In closing my remarks, I wish you a stimulating discussion for the sake of peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, allow me to invite our moderator, Dr. Dino Pati Jalal, founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. So Dr. Dino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you, our friend and partner, Yutaka Imura-san, for your very thoughtful remarks that set up beautifully the discussions that we will have. We have three panelists. Let me introduce them one by one. One is Associate Professor Dr. Tuğçe Ersoy Ceylan, Associate Professor at Izmir Democracy University in Turkey. Hi, Professor. Yes. And we have Dr. Amr Hamzawi, Director of Middle East Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's from Egypt. And if you see him a bit, dozed off, is because it's 2 a.m. in the morning or something in Washington, D.C. So we very much appreciate your joining us. And then we have also Hideki Matsunaga, Director General of JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, dealing with the Middle East and Europe Department. Let me just begin with the first question so that we all are on the same page, especially our audience. about what two-state solution is and what it is not. I would like to begin by asking Dr. Tuche to share her thoughts on what is the two-state solution and what it is not. Yeah, please, Dr. Tuche.
Thank you, Dr. Jalal, and I would like first thank you all the organizers and Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia for giving me this opportunity to explain my views on this issue. And also, firstly, I would like to express my deepest sorrow about for the loss of lives on both sides in Palestine and Israel. I would like also say that I condemn the brutality of Hamas actions on the civilians, and also I am deeply concerned with the humanitarian disaster that the Palestinian people are going through right now. So as Ambassador had told, the solution to all these atrocities and violence should be a final settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and this should be based on the two-state solution. So the idea of the concept of two-state solution as a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian protracted conflict became widespread with the Oslo peace process that began in 1993. However, two-state solution is not a new idea, is not a new concept. Moreover, two states for two peoples had been the international position since the UN partition plan back in 1947. Still, we should go 10 years back in time for the first appearance of the idea in the political scene. The idea of establishing two states in Palestine dates back to the British Mandate period. As a result of the increasing confrontations between the Arabs, the Palestinians, and the Jews in the Mandate Palestine, a commission, Peel Commission, was gathered in 1937 to find a solution to the ongoing confrontation. And this commission has offered for the first time the separation of two peoples and establishing two states, one Palestinian, other Israeli, in order to put an end to the ongoing clashes and conflict between the two sides. And it was the first time, as I've said, that the two-state option got on the stage. And this was followed by the UN partition plan that was introduced in 1947, and with the resolution 181, the historical Palestine was divided between the Jews and the Palestinians. 55% of the territories were given to the Jews, while 45% of the territories to the Palestinians. And with this UN decision, two-state solution has become an international position on the solution to the Israeli conflict. However, this partition plan was rejected by the Palestinians and by the Arab states back in 1947 on the grounds that it was unjust, and on the grounds that it disregarded the demographic reality of Palestine. And as a matter of fact, the Palestinian population was nearly 1.3 million, while the Jewish population was approximately 600,000 at the time of the introduction of UN partition plan in 1947. And this partition plan, as we know today from the history, did not work. There was a war between the Arab states and the newly established Israeli state in 1948. And here we are in this occupational situation, and we are now again searching for the revival of this international solution to the conflict. Okay, and it's right now debatable whether under which conditions we can revive this two-state solution.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tuche. I would like to ask Dr. Amr if he has any more comments on the concept of the two-state solution, and particularly when we talk about two-state solution, just to clarify to our audience, are we talking about one sovereign state with two states, two independent autonomous states, Israel and Palestine, or are we talking about two sovereign states? And also, is there any examples of a two-state format that you can cite for the benefit of our audience here?
Thank you so much, Dr. Dino. It's a pleasure to join you all, and it's a pleasure to join an audience to whom I rarely reach out in similar panel discussions. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to get out of primarily US as well as Middle Eastern discussions. So it's great to see an interested audience and crowd from somewhere else, and I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A part of our discussion today. Let me address your point, Dr. Dino, by highlighting maybe four or five key issues which are important to keep in mind. Number one, the reference to the two-state solution with regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict, and it's not an Israel-Hamas conflict, it's an Israel-Palestine conflict, and I believe the framing is very important because we're not only referring to Gaza as an occupied territory, we're referring to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as Gaza, as Palestinian occupied territories, which were occupied in the War of June 5th, 1967, the so-called 6 Days War. And since then, these territories have been under occupation until Israel pulled out single-handedly from Gaza almost a bit more than 20 years ago. And Gaza was left for internal Palestinian dynamics that I will get into in a minute. But the territories are not only Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem are included as well. The reference to the two-state solution is a reference based on a set of resolutions, most significantly the resolution which was just referenced by my colleague in her remarks, the UN resolution in the 1940s establishing for two sovereign states. The idea is not to have one sovereign state and two autonomous entities within, but two sovereign states coexisting in the historical mandate territory of Palestine. The resolution 194, if I'm not mistaken, is a resolution here at stake, and it stipulates two sovereign states. Do we have, just to close off this first point, in terms of historical background, do we have similar cases worldwide for the creation of an additional or two or more independent states on a territory previously held by one authority? Yes, I mean, we have different cases of secession, which happened throughout history up until the 1990s, when the Eastern European former Soviet bloc broke apart, and for example, the former Czechoslovak Republic emerged as two independent nation states. There are different cases, and cases run with us throughout the 20th century and prior to the 20th century as well. So let's establish that we're looking at an ideally from an international community perspective in terms of international resolutions, in terms of international stipulations at two sovereign states coexisting in peace in the historical mandate territory of Palestine. One. Second point, which I believe is more interesting for our audience, is what has gone wrong? Why is it that since, and I'm not only referring, and I will not walk you back to what has been happening since the 1940s, but let's go back to basically the last decades of the peace process. There were efforts in the Middle East after a series of wars, starting in 1948, followed by 1956, followed by 1967, which I was just referring to, followed by 1973, wars implicating Israel and different Arab partners, different Arab countries, and wars which resulted, especially in 1948 and 1967, in mass displacement of the Palestinian population. The reference is to the Nakba, and the Nakba is the mass displacement of Palestinians which followed 1948, the 1948 war. The reference as well to the occupation of 1967 of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, which were previously under Jordanian and Egyptian administration between 1948 and 1967, and that resulted in a second wave of mass displacement. The Palestinian population has been paying a heavy price since the 1940s, and Israel has not been living in peace since then. So if the objective, as the ambassador was saying in the beginning, is to get the region to peace and stability and get Israel to live in security and the Palestinians to get to the right of self-determination, the only path forward is to establish peace arrangements, conflict resolution and peace arrangements. There have been different peace initiatives, starting with Egypt and Israel signing a bilateral peace treaty in 1979, followed by the very well-known Madrid Conference in 1991, in which the US, after the liberation of Kuwait war, pushed for a regional peace conference with international participation. And what resulted out of it was the Oslo agreements signed between Israel and the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that created the Palestinian National Authority and allowed it to return to the occupied territories, West Bank and Gaza. And Jordanian-Israeli peace was signed. However, the core conflict between Israel and Palestine was not solved. So whatever was agreed upon was not implemented on the ground. And this is not an issue only pertaining to the current Netanyahu government. It goes way back in the recent past of signing different agreements that were not implemented in good faith on both sides, on the Israeli as well as on the Palestinian side. However, the crucial fact here is that the implementation leading to a self-determination and to a Palestinian state never happened. And international actors just flip-flopped in terms of their interest in the subject matter. So we have a lingering crisis, second point. Third point, I, similar to my previous speakers, condemn the killing of civilians on all sides. I also condemn anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim feelings, which are emerging in different places. What is at stake, however, is how to figure out a way of reviving the peace process, maybe by some creative solutions. And I'm going to copy in the chat a link to a recent publication, which I put forward with my colleague, Professor Nathan Brown, on the Arab Peace Initiative 2.0, which is an attempt to look into how to get creative about reviving the peace process by maybe including more partners and make it primarily a regional-led process, unlike previous processes which were led by the US and the international community, without, of course, sidelining the US. Final point, I believe it's very important to keep in mind that what is here at stake is safety, security for the Israeli society, and self-determination, prosperity, independent state for the Palestinians. Is it still possible? This is where we have to look at the details of what has been happening in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, in terms of the settlement activities and what remains of the territory that can be used to establish a Palestinian state. And we have to look at Gaza and what's happening right now and what kind of efforts will it take for reconstruction and to create Gaza as a livable place once again, to create the Gaza territory as a livable place once again. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Amer. Let me now turn to Director General Hideki. before we go deeper into the practical challenge of two-state solution, Director General Hideki, does the two-state solution assume that a purely military solution is not sustainable and it's not tenable, and also secondly, that the present status quo, the one-state presence, is also not a solution? Does the two-state solution give room for those two assumptions?
Yes. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for having me for this very timely and important session. And I'm so glad to join, all distinguished panelists as well as scholars for this event. And I think already, the two-state solution itself was comprehensively explained by Dr. Tuce as well as Dr. Amo. So I'm going to add not more than that. Ambassador Imura, in his opening remarks, very comprehensive opening remarks, he concluded there is no other path than two-state solution. At the same time, Ambassador Imura also mentioned about recent polls, the support rate of Palestinian people as well as the Israeli people for two-state solution. So it's a very low rate right now. But again, what is then alternative? As Dr. Dino, you mentioned, just keep status quo. And the recent crisis and the crash between Israel and Hamas clearly showed it's not really feasible and viable. And in the past, there are discussion about three-state solution as well, and divide Palestine into two, Gaza and West Bank. And I don't think that is feasible either. So based on the process of elimination, I think only the viable solution will be two-state solution. But at the same time, in the short term, given the current crisis and killing of so many people on both sides, psychologically, it will not be easy to engage in the negotiation and restart it. But having said that, as Dr. Amo mentioned about his recent article with Dr. Nathan Brown, and we really, I think international community really has to come up with, Arab, peace process 2.0 or version 2. And that's really a time. And we really have to start that process. And in that connection, we are glad you are organizing this very important seminar at this very critical juncture. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Hideki-san. Let me ask the three panelists your views on. It seems like it's such a very logical solution, two-state solution, a political solution, and peaceful political solution. But can you explain why it is so difficult to reach such a two-state solution? And if maybe Dr. Amer also can explain why did the year 2000 Camp David attempt between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat, mediated by Bill Clinton, and that seemed to be the closest opportunity. But why did that fail? But maybe Dr. Tuce can first talk about why is it so difficult to realize the two-state solution? Can you unmute? Can you unmute, Dr. Tuce? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry. Yes, as you have said, attaining the two-state solution as a settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has become so difficult day by day, year by year, maybe we can say, because Israel has created facts on the ground. The successive governments, Israeli governments, created fait accompli, let's say, in time, And as a matter of fact, unless these facts on the ground were undone, two-state solution would be an impossible solution. So under these circumstances, it's right now an impossible solution. And there are some obstacles in front of the two-state solution. Maybe I can briefly talk about them. The first one is, as my colleague Dr. Hamzavi has mentioned, the turning point, or maybe I can, it is better to say as the point of no return, maybe, the 1967, the Six Days War, at the end of which Israel has become an occupying power. Israel captured West Bank and Gaza Strip following this war, and it became an occupying power. The road to two-state solution following this war, maybe we can say, began to collapse due to the emergence of some new ideologies within the society and within also the political circles. So I can say that following the 6 Days War, the Israeli politics and also Israeli society was divided between two core ideologies. On the one side, we have the peace camp, and we can say them the leftists, and on the right, on the other side, we have the we see the emergence of the Greater Israel ideology, which sought to integrate the whole Palestine into Israel proper. And this ideology, and maybe we can say the opportunity that the supporters of this Greater Israel ideology has seen in the capture of West Bank and Gaza Strip, paved the way for the inauguration of the Israeli settlement enterprise. And with the introduction of this enterprise, this settlement activity, the territories, the occupied territories, began to be annexed gradually to the Israeli state, and this would make the two-state option unviable. And this was the first one, the Israel appearing as an occupying power. The second obstacle, maybe, the Jewish settlements. How are the Jewish settlements are obstacles to the two-state solution? The very first answer is that they are dividing the territory on which the Palestinian state is envisaged to be established. So, as there would not be a territorial integrity, a Palestinian state would be far from being viable. So, if the settlement issue is not solved, the creation of a genuine Palestinian state is not possible, according to me. And the settlement activity has grown day by day, year by year, following 1967. Especially another turning point in this context might be the Likud in power in 1977. From 1977 onwards, Israel began to build settlements in between Palestinian population centers, and the aim was to delocalize the Palestinians. And another aim was to change the West Bank's demographic balance by transplanting Israeli Jews on the occupied territories. And today, nearly, as far as I remember, there are 750,000 settlers in the West Bank, and it is becoming more difficult to undone this settlement process. And despite the fact that Oslo peace process was a peace process, was initiated in order to establish two states in the historical Palestinian territories. However, during this peace process, we have seen that the West Bank territories has been divided into three main areas: Area E, A, Area B, Area C. and also during the peace process, the settlement activity continued unabated. So in the territories which would be the future Palestinian states, we have seen the continuation of the construction of Jewish settlements even during the Oslo peace process. And as a result of this construction of settlements, we now see 4 disconnected Palestinian areas in the West Bank. We have the northern West Bank, we have the southern West Bank, they are divided. We have East Jerusalem, and we have Gaza Strip in the south. And also in time, Israel has created bypass roads, a system of bypass roads in order to annex the Jewish settlements in the occupied territories. However, these roads separated the Palestinian areas while they were annexing the Jewish settlements. So they have become the permanent structures, and they now serve as a, how can I say, as a mechanism of control. So there are the roads, there are the Jewish settlements, and they mean that Israel has installed an unconditional control over all the West Bank. So with this control over the West Bank, even a Palestinian state could be established. Its viability would be question, an issue of discussions because of this control of bypass roads and Jewish settlements. And another obstacle may be the Jewish settlers themselves. And as I've said, the population is around 700,000 today. And yes, there are some Israeli citizens who came to West Bank for cheaper housing opportunities. However, most Jewish settlers are settling in occupied territories for ideological reasons, and they are becoming more radicalized day by day. And according to me, there is no political Israeli politician who can take the risk of this engagement. And we have seen Ariel Sharon back in 2005 with his decision of unilateral disengagement from Gaza, and he was met with violent reactions coming from the settlers. And another obstacle may be the separation wall that Israel began to construct during the Second Intifada. And back in that time, the people had argued that the wall would create a de facto two-state solution. However, it's more likely that as a result of the separation wall, there occurred an apartheid era South African reality rather than a state for the Palestinians. So keeping all of these factors in mind, maybe I can conclude that the two-state solution was wandering away gradually from being the viable option for a permanent peace settlement between Israel and Palestinians. However, it is, as I've said before, the most favored solution offered by international public opinion. So maybe once the international community, the Palestinians and the Israelis, became voluntary to eliminate these obstacles behind the two-state solution, there would be a chance to implement this concept as a solution. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Tuğçe. Dr. Amer, despite the declining prospects of the two-state solution, do you think that the present crisis in Gaza and the present Israel-Palestinian tension and clash, has that made the prospect significantly even smaller for a two-state solution? Yeah, and also if you can comment about why the 2000 Accord between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat failed. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dino. Let me start by the second part of your question. The 2000 Camp David effort, mediated by the United States and on the Israeli side, former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and on the Palestinian side, late historic leader of the PLO, Yasser Arafat. The effort failed for one main reason, which was that the Palestinian side, and we have to keep in mind that the Oslo agreements were signed in 1993, so we were 7 years into the process. And according to the Oslo agreements, in fact, earlier than 2000, if I'm not mistaken, 1997 or 1998, a Palestinian state, an independent Palestinian state, should have been in existence, should have existed already. So there was a great deal of frustration on the Palestinian side with the timelines, with the time schedules, which were not upheld, which were not implemented, and with the segmentation, in fact, compartmentalization of the Palestinian issue in different ways, eating from the territory of the independent Palestinian state. What was offered in 2000 was an offer which we would consider now actually an ideal offer, but back then it was not. You always have to bring in history into what was being discussed, what was offered. So once again, the Palestinians were looking at a delay in the implementation. We're looking at implementation not in good faith from different Israeli governments. And within Israel, Ehud Barak's position back then was not very popular, because back then the cycle of radicalization and violence had already kicked in after a few years of no violence and no radicalization following the signing of the Oslo Agreement. Similar to the 2000 efforts were the Clinton parameters. The Clinton parameters were announced a couple of years earlier, and were in fact discussed, based on which the discussion happened between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. And the Clinton parameters had some solutions for the settlement activity, but the settlements back then occupied within the West Bank only 4% to 6% of the territory before 2000. And the Clinton parameters were very creative. They were announced by former President Clinton and were creative, suggesting different ways out, including swap between some portions of land within the West Bank being swapped in return for Israel, in return for the Negev Desert, or as we say in Arabic, Sahara al-Naqab, the Naqab Desert, parts of it being given to the Palestinians. So there were very creative solutions put forward in the Clinton parameters on the settlement issue, on the final status of Jerusalem, of the right of return, but nothing was implemented on the ground. So this was the background of it, Dr. Dino, the delay in implementation of the Oslo agreements between 1993 and 2000. Let me now come to sort of very quickly, to let my dear friend Haidiki comment as well, sort of look at why is it that the two-state solution as of now, and I wouldn't say not viable, but is quite difficult to implement on the ground. One, and so I'm just referencing thematically issues which we have to be aware of. Number one is a shift, as the ambassador was saying in the beginning, a shift away from a popular preference for the two-state solution in both Israel and Palestine, a shift that has been happening, unfolding in recent years, again, the background of radicalization on both sides. If Hamas and what it presents for Palestinian politics represents definitely the outcome of a wave of radicalization, the growing dominance of far right-wing politics in Israel is a reflection of radicalization within the Israeli body politic as well. So number one is radicalization on both sides, and within that radicalization, the two-state solution is not accepted, neither by far right-wing Israelis who would like to have a one-state reality, canceling the existence of the Palestinians, including sort of, I would say, fantastic solutions being put forward on mass displacement and a massive mass second Nakba, Palestinians of the West Bank to the East Bank and out of Gaza Gaza to Sinai, solutions which will never be accepted by the region. But these solutions which are circulated by far right wing and settlers parties are a representation of a wish to impose a one-state solution by canceling the Palestinian people altogether. And on the other side, Hamas does not recognize the right of Israel to exist. So radicalization on both sides as number one. A second point is lack of political leadership, lack of innovative, daring political leadership on both sides. And I believe right now the world is discussing how to reinvigorate the Palestinian Authority, how to re-energize the Palestinian National Authority around President Mahmoud Abbas, how to find different actors on the ground in the West Bank and in Gaza away from radical militants. But the fact of the matter is that the Palestinian political leadership has been eaten away to a great extent in the delays of the implementation of the Oslo agreements. It's an authority in Ramallah which is stuck in minor management issues without a vision for how to implement the right to self-determination. And Gaza was ruled by Hamas for over 20 years, not to create economic prosperity, not to create security, but in fact to enter into permanent rounds of clashes with the Israeli army, permanent rounds of militarization of the conflict between. So lack of political leadership on the Palestinian side and lack of leadership on the Israeli side as well. Remember what was happening in Israel before October 7 in terms of internal tensions between the Netanyahu government and the pro-democracy movement, which was emerging quite big on the streets of different Israeli cities, pushing against the religiousization of Israeli politics and the growing dominance of far right-wing politics. There is lack of political leadership on both sides. Number three, the international community. I believe the international community has looked away from Israel and Palestine, from the Palestinian issue for some time, believing that normalization agreements between Israel on the one hand and single-handedly Arab governments, Arab countries like the Abrahamic Accords, for example, signed between Israel on the one hand, the UAE, Bahrain, and the Gulf, Morocco, on the other hand, will do the trick of creating regional stability and regional peace. October 7 shows us that there is no peace in this region without solving the Palestinian issue, without having Israel live in security and having the Palestinians have the right of self-determination. So the international community looked away and confined itself to economic assistance on the side of the Europeans and on the side of Japan, for example, or to very minor political statements coming out of the Trump administration and the Biden administration. In fact, the Biden administration did not have a policy Palestine issue until October 7. 2023. Final point, the regional environment. I believe the region, we've been living in a turmoil in the region since 2011, and this turmoil with different civil wars emerging in different places. Look at Libya, look at Yemen, look at Syria, of course, look at tensions in Sudan, a civil war, look at instability in the region in general. The region has been living in turmoil, and the turmoil, the overall turmoil in the region devaluated the importance of the Palestinian question. Now we're all waking up to a different reality. So I'm hoping that the international and regional environment can be of help to push forward a different political leadership in Israel and Palestine. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Amer. Hideki-san, I think I want to take up the last point mentioned by Dr. Amer about the international community getting involved, but nobody seems to be taking the lead. But we also know that neither Palestine nor Israel is going to come to the negotiating table by themselves, right? I think that's just not going to happen. There will need to be external push for both sides to come to the negotiating table at some point, and we don't know when. So I guess my questions to you, I mean, you know, I hear Washington, London, and Brussels, and they're all saying the same thing. Yeah, two-state solution has to be revived, but no one wants to take the lead, right? So from your viewpoint, what set of countries are realistic now and have pull enough vis-a-vis Palestine and Israel to start pushing for the for the two sides to come to the negotiating table? And also a subset of the question, would countries like the United States, for example, accept Hamas sitting on that table? Yeah. And also, of course, Israel as well. Yeah. So those two questions, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dino. And I think this is a very important questions. And Dr. Amol mentioned about we should learn from the history, and I fully agree with him. And when we look at the peace negotiation between Israel and Egypt after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, after six years or so, there was, a peace agreement between the Egypt and Israel, who was fighting, 6-7 years ago, and it's I believe remarkable achievement. And during that process, in that case, I think there was some external stakeholders, third party, who play a critical role. And one was Ceausescu, of the Romanian president, as well as King Hassan of Morocco played a role. And we really have to find those kind of leaders. Dr. Amol mentioned about the leaders, importance of leaders. And in addition to importance of leaders of both Israeli and Palestinian, we really have to look for international leaders who are willing to engage in this, kind of mediation role. Maybe not as direct as what President Carter played during this, peace process between Israel and Egypt, but it was not only the United States, as I mentioned, Romania and Morocco played a role. So from that perspective, we really have to analyze the current, global political environment and who has a role, who can talk, who can speak both Israeli as well as the Palestinian side in more impartial manner. And at this moment, as we see, for the hostage negotiation, Qatar is playing a big role, and Egypt is playing a big role as well, and Turkey will be playing a big role. But having said that, I think this crisis is not only the regional crisis; it's international issues. And Ambassador Imura mentioned in his opening remarks about the CPAD initiative, which he really initiated. CPAD means a Conference on Cooperation among East Asian countries for Palestinian development. And that is really a unique, I think, initiative. And still, I think that approach is valid because it was really an initiative to engage stakeholders beyond Middle East and Arab world. And a country like Indonesia, Malaysia, those East Asian countries were engaged in that process. And somehow, because of the political environment, it's not active as before, but it's, I think Dr. Amol mentioned about engagement of the international community and also Arab peace process version 2. And in that process, I believe non-conventional, non-Middle East stakeholder should be involved. But how are we going to do it? That's something really we need to discuss. And Dr. Dino, second question about Hamas, whether we can bring them to the negotiation table now. We really have to look at that questions from short, middle, and the long-term perspective. And short-term, because of this, unprecedented killing of Israeli civilians, I don't think, it's acceptable to Israel to sit together with Hamas, and neither probably the United States. But having said that, I'd like to point out two things. you know, again, learning from history, what we see the PLO, you know, I mean, before, and it was designated as, I mean, a terrorist group. And they used to engage in hijacking of airplane and all kinds of very brutal, I think, act. But however, as the time goes, it was considered as one of the stakeholders. But it really needs a time, you know, to make that happen. And another aspect I would like to mention is Hamas itself is not monolithic, you know, not a one voice institution, and it has a political wing, it's a military wing, as well as a function to provide a basic service, as well as a welfare to the resident in Gaza. So Hamas itself is really it's not a solid institution, it's really a group. I mean, it's more like a movement and it's ideology, and it's a group of different voices. So we really have to analyze the Hamas in more, you know, deeper, in order to in the future make some kind of negotiation happen. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next two questions is for Dr. Amr and Dr. Tuche. Dr. Amr, specifically, can Fatah and Hamas and the other factions in Palestine come together? You wrote an article recently, excellent article, where you pointed out that one of the main obstacles is that they don't get along and they just can't come together. And I've been saying in my country, Indonesia, that the reason why so many ethnic groups and islands, we have 17,000 islands, got our independence was because everybody put aside their differences and they united to fight for our independence. And that lesson seems to be lost in the present Palestine. So can they come together? And for Dr. Tuche, this is a similar question. Do you think Netanyahu, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, would consider it a political suicide if he announced tomorrow that he would start the resumption of the two-state dialogue? So the first question to Dr. Amr. Yeah. Fatah and Hamas and others, can they come together?
Sure, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dino. I mean, there are great and excellent lessons on how to build national consensus, how to create national reconciliation, which we can, in the region in general. It's by no means, I mean, it's most dramatic as of now in Palestine, the lack of national reconciliation. I believe lack of national consensus is an issue which we have to be aware of with regard to Israel as well. But away from Israel and Palestine, we live in a region where we have serious deficits when it comes to the creation of national consensus, reconciliation, moving countries away from civil war or civil war-like situations. As I said, I named in my previous intervention 3 countries most troubled by civil war and civil war-like situations: Syria, Yemen, and Libya. And Sudan should be added to them. So this is an overall issue in the region. So it's important for us to look around and try to learn from inspiring cases, be it in Indonesia or elsewhere. On your question regarding Fatah and Hamas, the root cause of the differences, in fact, not only the differences, but what was carried out as an outright Palestinian civil war in Gaza following the elections of 2005, and for some time until Hamas took over control of the Gaza Strip in 2007 and started ruling it single-handedly. The root cause is a difference in ideology. Fatah has come to recognize the two-state solution as the way forward, and with recognizing the two-state solution, you recognize the right of Israel to exist and call for a Palestinian independent state, sovereign state, alongside coexisting with Israel. Hamas is yet to recognize the two-state solution as the forward path and is yet to recognize the right of Israel to exist. Secondly, there are so ideology is one. Two, there has been competition between the two movements on the ground. Last played out in a democratic fashion in the elections of 2005, which Hamas won. Hamas won both in Gaza as well as in the West Bank, where the elections were held. The international community was not ready to recognize Hamas victory. And there were difficulties pertaining to what Haidiki was referring to, as Hamas is not simply a political movement or a political party. It has a political leadership, it has an armed wing, it has a social service delivery machinery, and it's all of this in one, which makes it very difficult for the international community to manage Hamas. But so there is fierce political competition between the two groups. Number three, which is more sort of the real issue here at stake, and where I see an entry point for the international regional community to help Palestinians find to a national vision, to a consensually agreed upon national vision. I believe the differences and conflicts and even the outright battling and war between Hamas and Fatah, all of which came into existence because the option of implementing the two-state solution was receding with time. So the PLO, the PA, Fatah were very popular when the Oslo agreements were signed. When they returned Palestinian leadership for the first time since 1948 to Palestine, with the return to Gaza, with the return to Jericho, with the return to Ramallah, the PLO and Fatah were very popular. It's again the background of declining prospects of proper implementation of the Oslo agreements of self-determination that Hamas was gaining ground. It's again the background of radicalization in Israel and violence on both sides. And remember the killing of former Prime Minister Rabin and so on. And so radical movements, militant movements were gaining ground, Hamas on the Palestinian side and settlers on the Israeli side. So if we would like to undo the process, and we have to be prepared that even if we imagine in an ideal world that the parties will sit tomorrow at the negotiating table and start negotiating, since now we have a ceasefire or a halt in the war. Even if we imagine in an ideal world that they would sit at the negotiating table tomorrow, we have to be aware of the fact that any negotiation process will be accompanied by a trace of blood, that attacks will continue to happen, violence will continue to happen, terrorist attacks will continue to happen. So are we prepared to do that? I believe unwinding means, first of all, Palestinian factions, and here a group within Hamas will have to be included. I agree with Haidiki. We cannot reduce Hamas to the armed wing. It's very difficult to do that from an Israeli perspective. It's very difficult to do it from an international community perspective. But probably within Palestine, they have to sit down and agree on a national reconciliation formula. Egypt mediated similar talks before. Maybe now is the time to mediate a new round of national reconciliation talks between the Palestinians that can only go in the direction of recognizing the two-state solution, the right of Israel to exist, and of course the right of self-determination, because the alternative is a one-state reality. It can be a post-apartheid one-state reality, but it can also be a militant one-state reality in which one group of the two groups is cancelled and does not have an institutional manifestation as an institutional manifestation of its existence. So national reconciliation is a top priority for the Palestinians based on, I still believe, on the two-state solution, because any other alternative is not viable for the international community, not viable regionally, and is not a pleasant reality on the ground given the power imbalances between Israelis and Palestinians. So a one-state solution can be not an anti-apartheid, but a full-scale apartheid state, a full-scale militant state that we do not wish, and democratic forces on the two sides do not wish as well. Second point, when you have a nationally agreed upon Palestinian vision, start figuring out a way of representing the Palestinians at the negotiating table. And Haidiki is right, we should learn from history. In 1991, in the Madrid conference, Dr. Dino, there was a huge discussion prior to the 1991 Madrid conference on who represents the Palestinians. In fact, the Palestinians were represented within the Jordanian delegation because the PLO was looked at as a terrorist organization, designated as a terrorist organization. So what ended happening in 1991 was local leaders from the West Bank and Gaza were part of the Jordanian delegation, but they were coordinating with the PLO, and gradually the PLO was let into the negotiating process. So a gradual path can be envisaged, of course, not with anyone implicated in the killing of civilians. Final point, it's important for the regional environment, and here I'm explicitly saying not only the Arab world or the Middle East with Turkey and Iran, to help the Palestinians figure out a viable path toward national reconciliation. I believe the Muslim world in general, so I'm including Indonesia, I'm including Malaysia, I'm including different countries outside the Middle East, Pakistan, for example, it's important to have some wider Muslim backing of the national reconciliation, and to make the two-state solution once again a key component of what we as a Muslim world are looking for. And that takes recognition of the right of Israel to exist. It takes normalization with Israel, but it also takes the right of self-determination on the Palestinian side. So you need a conducive environment within the Muslim world which can help Palestinians come to a two-state solution-based national consensus vision for the future.
Thank you, Dr. Amer. And my observation is that things have been so emotional now, especially in the Muslim world, but also in parts of the Western world and in Israel, that sometimes it's hard to see a rational solution, rational path in the midst of all these really incredible emotions. Yeah, I want to go to Dr. Tuche to ask the question: would Prime Minister Netanyahu consider it a political suicide if he announced tomorrow the resumption of two-state solution?
Yes, I should say that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is already in a difficult situation right now, and as far as I remember, the support coming from his own party is on the decrease right now. So even the Likud members, his party's members, have decreased their support towards Netanyahu and his politics. So if there would be an announcement coming about the initiation of the negotiation process, I agree that it would be a political suicide for Netanyahu. However, we should keep in mind that Netanyahu is a veteran politician and he knows very well how to sell or package, let's say, the ideas and turn the tide on him. However, as far as the domestical society, the Israel is concerned, I can say, as I said, he is in a difficult situation. On the one side, we have the far ultra-nationalistic groups, and they are now in power in Israeli politics. And on the other side, as far as this last conflict concerned, the October 7th, we have the peace camp, and also we have the hostage families. And there is a burning anger towards Netanyahu coming from these hostage families because they blame Netanyahu over the failures leading up to October 7. There is anger over the hostages' families again because they think that they have been ignored by Netanyahu. And there is also an anger over Netanyahu's unwillingness to so far to accept any responsibility because of these October attacks. So on the other hand, maybe I should say, the second the fighting is over in Gaza, it is likely that we may witness the protests and the manifestations on the streets against the government that we have seen before the October 7 attacks. And I think this time there would be more angry people who are angry, who would be angry to Netanyahu. And after the 2 days of shock following the October 7 attacks, the leftist newspaper Haaretz. We have seen the headline on Haaretz that was attributing the responsibility of October 7 to Netanyahu and his policies or his deliberate inactivity towards the solution to the conflict. So there is a public opinion in Israel who wants, who blames Netanyahu for his inactivity, for his unwillingness to solve the conflict. But on the other hand, as I've said, we have the supporters of the invasion of Gaza, IDF operations in Gaza, and these far-right ultra-nationalist religious groups chant for the death of Arabs and support the ground invasion. And this situation also, these also make the situation of Netanyahu difficult, because these people claim that the Jews are returning to the lands promised by God. And lastly, I can say yes, Netanyahu's political career is on the decline, and he is already maybe searching ways to cover the responsibility to other issues to peoples.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Dr. Tuche. I know Dr. Hideki has to go, so I'm going to ask the last question to him, and then after you answer it, you can leave the screen. Dr. Hideki, and this is a question to all three panelists actually. We know that the comprehensive two-state solution is very difficult because its elements are just so sensitive and the positions are so wide apart. The territory issue, the status of Jerusalem, the Palestinian refugees, the status of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and so on. From your viewpoint, out of all these issues that they would probably have to deal with on the negotiating table, which issue is, just pick one, which issue is the most bridgeable? And then the same question to Dr. Amr, and then to Dr. Tuche, and then we will wrap up. What issue would be most bridgeable in the two-state negotiations?
This is Hideki, and thank you very much. And I think this is very difficult question to answer, because even compared with the time of Camp David, which you questioned before, the situation or all aspect has changed, and the situation on Palestinian side has got even more difficult. And so in that sense, I'm sorry to say it's extremely difficult. Having said that, not a bridgeable issue, but what I would say is the most difficult issue continue to be probably Jerusalem issue. Is going to be very difficult, because I mentioned about Egypt and the Israel peace process, and when Sadat went to Knesset to deliver speech in 1977, he talked about the wall of psychology, and that's really, especially, I'm Japanese and I don't understand that well, but I think Jerusalem issue and Temple Mount, and this time, Hamas named this operation as Flood, Al-Aqsa. So that has really the meaning, and it really touch upon the bottom line of the many Islam people. So I cannot answer, you straight, but that's what I think. But thank you very much for this.
By the way, before you leave, a lot of question. I also want Dr. Amr and Dr. Tuche to answer this at the last part. Two-state solution never happened, will never happen, will happen in 10 years, or will happen in 20 years or 50 years. So those four, which one? Dr. Hideki? Oh, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I want that to happen, but the 10 years after this, killing of both sides, it would be very difficult. But as Ambassador Imura said at the beginning, it is only a viable solution. That's what I think. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Dr. Amr?
Yes, thank you so much. Let me basically rephrase what Hideki just said, which is I continue to believe that it is the desired way forward. It is a preferred way forward for the international as well as the regional community. It's a preferred way forward for peace movements in Israel and Palestine, as well as in the region. It's not a preferred way forward for militant groups on both sides. And in terms of its viability, given the discussion which we've been having in the last an hour and a bit, I believe it's difficult, but it can still happen if we agree on the final goal, which is two sovereign states living and coexisting in peace, and we start reverse engineering and learning from the past. So my response to you, Dr. Dino, is in 3 sentences. One, learning from the past. A very crucial lesson from the past is the difficulties of not implementing timelines in good faith. That means that we need to have actors with international and regional backing committed to the implementation of any agreed upon timelines in the negotiations, implementing in good faith and in clarity to win popular approval on both sides. So lessons from the past. One of the second key lessons from the past is that we can always place our bet on the graduality of the negotiation process. It's possible to get out of the difficulties of who to represent on the Palestinian side by factoring in time. Negotiations solve issues as you negotiate and progress forward. So learning from the past is one. Secondly, the principles here at stake are key. This is about ending occupation. This is about Palestinian self-determination, as well as about Israel living in peace and security, and Israel inclusion in the region. So these principles have to be clear and have to keep being spelled out. Finally, the international community and the wider regional community, and I'm including once again Muslim majority countries, need to put forward their backing and not to look away after a while. Negotiations between war was difficult, but they take a strong commitment, a long-term commitment that does not flip-flop due to domestic changes in US administrations or due to conflicts elsewhere emerging and taking global attention. A long-term strategic commitment to enabling the two parties, Israelis and Palestinians, to come to a peaceful settlement. So these are my 3 words on your question.
Thank you. And timeline, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, it will never happen, a 2-state solution.
Well, I cannot speculate. I'm hoping that we will not have to wait for 10 years, but it's a very difficult situation. It will take committed leadership, it will take creativity, it will take vision, and international and regional backing. So we'll see what will happen.
Thank you. Dr. Tuche, same question. What are issues?
Okay.
And 10, 20, 50, or never?
Thank you. I'm a little pessimistic about the timeline here. There are so controversial issues that is still on the table, and I don't see that they would be resolved in the near future, because there is a gap between the reality and the rhetoric concerning the peace settlement in the Israeli issue. And as for the bridgeable issues, it's also difficult. Maybe the first thing I would say in order to construct bridges between Israelis and the Palestinians would be the elimination of the radicalization, the radical elements on both sides. And maybe after this elimination of the radical elements, maybe the two sides can sit and start a viable negotiation. And this is really about the changing the mindset, changing the environment. And in the positive sense, peace means that peace means the absence of structural violence, the absence of cultural violence. So if there is a chance for a peace settlement in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, one should invest first and foremost in ruling the elements of structural violence out, and discrimination, dehumanization, delegitimization, exclusion, inequality, equal rights, etc. These are all the elements of a discriminatory regime, and this regime first has to change, and then maybe the perspective and the mindset, and then maybe we can talk about the peace settlement, but I can't give any timeline about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if, and I know we are running out of time, but if any of the participants here have want to raise, I'll just allow one question, and if you want to raise your hand, if you have any questions. And by the way, we have participants from Indonesia, Japan, Denmark, the Philippines, Vanuatu. Hello, Vanuatu, and South Africa. Yeah. So, yeah. Jericho from Philippines. Yes. Please ask your questions. Yeah. Jericho, please unmute and ask your question.
Hello?
Yes, please.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Good day, panelists. I am Jericho Zafra. I am a news reporter and a content specialist in the Philippines. I just want to ask, it's open to any of the panelists. This is from the perspective of conflict reporting. So is the media coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict biased? And does it shape public opinion in a way that it hinders constructive dialogue? And at the same time, to what extent does the Israel-Hamas conflict highlight the challenges of balancing national security interests with human rights concerns in foreign policy? Thank you.
Maybe because Dr. Tuche is a specialist on media, maybe she can answer this question. Okay, I wonder if Dr. Amar would like to answer that question, because she doesn't seem to be on the Zoom. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I'm afraid I'm not a media specialist, and so any statement which I would make would be based on my personal observation. So I wouldn't share them as a response to the important question raised. Only one quick observation. Moving in the direction of the role of social media. I believe this time the conflict coverage has not been dominated by conventional media. Social media platforms have been playing a huge role in informing and disseminating information as well as misinformation worldwide. So it's important for media specialists to look at the dynamics of conventional media and social media. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for asking questions. I know there's Andre, and then also Dwi, Rosie, who asked questions, but unfortunately we're running out of time. And just as a closing, I just want to flag that I think in the year 2000, when I was in government, I was in a meeting and with President Bush. I was just a note taker. And back then he was proudly saying, look, the U.S. new position is to support a two-state solution, and it's going to happen in the next 2 years, right? And this was in 2002 or 3, right? He said it, and this was about 21 years later, right? It's really not an easy feat. I think it's going to be some time and great hurdles before we get there, and we don't know which countries will help bring the two parties to the table, and we know that the political will to come to the table on the part of Israel and Palestine is becoming less and less, and so is public opinion. And on the issues that will be discussed, the bridgeable part are very, very few. All right. Yet a two-state solution remains the only solution. The absence of two-state solution means the absence of a permanent peace, the absence of permanent political solution. And as we know, any political solution must be achieved on the negotiating table. It can't be achieved on the military field. And a political solution must be achieved through compromise, which means each side has to give something in a process of political compromise. This is what happened in Cambodian conflict and all the other conflicts that have been resolved around the world. The question is that, is there enough statesmanship both in Palestine and Israel? Once again, is there enough statesmanship in Palestine and Israel? Because in many other conflicts that have been resolved, it is because there is craft, there is imagination, there's skill, and there's also statesmanship on the parts of the conflicting parties. And we all pray and hope that there will be a two-state solution. We all pray for the present crisis in Gaza will end. We all pray that the civilian casualties will stop and the military confrontation will stop. And we all pray for, at some point, the resumption of a peaceful political process towards a two-state solution. I thank Dr. Amer and wish him a good night's sleep. And I thank Hideki-san for his participation, and also Dr. Tuche and my brother Imura-san, and all those who are taking part in this discussion. Yeah, thank you. Assalamualaikum. Shalom.
Thank you, Dr. Dino, for moderating today's discussion. And thank you also to all the speakers for sharing your incredible insights. Before we wrap up the event, I would like to invite the speakers and everyone for a short photo session. So on my count, we'll go 1, 2, 3. And we'll just do one more. So I'll do another countdown. 1, 2, 3. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. It has been a fruitful discussion, and I'm sure the audience found this session interesting and highly informative. Today's event is available for rewatch on FPCI official YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's discussion. You can follow our social media handles for more information about our activities, events, and programs. And also stay tuned to our next FPCI GRIPS Virtual Public Forum and Global Town Hall series via Instagram or Twitter at FPC Indo. See you at the next FPCI event and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.